on notice. And hopefully everyone can see my screen. But I just wanted to give a little introduction before we hand this over to our speakers. So a little logistical information. We are going to have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of this presentation, but for the sake of flow, we're going to wait until the very end. So please feel free to submit your questions in the chat as we go along, and then I will kind of start from the beginning and move through those questions as far as we get. For those questions we may not have time to get to today, we will make sure that we capture those, and if there is perhaps something we'd like to follow up on, we can help support that. So I am going to just give, like I said, a quick overview of our program. So for those who may not be familiar with the Habitat Strategic Initiative Lead, we are a state agency team co-led by the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Natural Resources, and we sit under the umbrella of the National Estuary Program. And so our mission is to enable and accelerate habitat protection and restoration through the advancement of our implementation strategies, which you may have heard of, but those include the floodplains and estuary strategy, the land development and cover strategy, the shoreline armoring strategy, and the newest to the family, which is the marine vegetation strategy. And so our team actually serves the Puget Sound recovery community through a variety of different ways. The first one is we support strategic planning processes. We also create and convene partnerships and support important dialogues. And we fund activities critical to advancing habitat restoration that are difficult to fund through more traditional funding sources. So activities include planning, capacity building, community engagement, and other types of activities where it's not capital improvement necessarily, but it's those really critical activities that lay the foundation and the connections for that work. And so we do this through the management of the EPA geographic program funds. Again, we have a cooperative agreement with the EPA, and so that's really an important part of our program. And so today's presentation on the Livingston Bay Restoration Feasibility Study is an example of one such project that the HSIL funded in fiscal year 2020, and it is just now concluding. And so this is an exciting opportunity to share the results of that project. But this project was recommended for funding by our Island LIO partner under the HSIL Shared Investment Pilot Program. And so the goal of this pilot program was to work collaboratively with LIOs to achieve both local and regional priorities together. And so for the Livingston Bay project, Island LIO worked with local partners, a number of them, to identify a project that would advance multiple restoration priorities, as well as a regionally significant restoration project that was identified through PSNRP, which is the Puget Sound Nearshore Restoration Project's 20-year DFW Army Corps General Investigation program, which was focusing on restoring nearshore processes that create the habitat structure and function upon which native species depend. And so I'm actually just going to hand this over to our project manager, which is Dan Elephant with Environmental Science Associates. He's going to kick off the presentation and share a little bit more with you about the project. But just as a reminder, feel free to submit questions through the chat, and I will moderate the Q&A at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to stop screen sharing so that Dan can take it away.
Hey, everybody. Can you see just my slides?
Yep, looks great.
So I am Dan Elephant. I've got a hell of a case of COVID, and I'm going to do my best to present the results of our team's analysis here today, despite. So good to see. It's really nice to see some friends in the audience, and go easy on me today, everybody. But a really cool project that I can't wait to talk a little bit about here. I'm representing the work of my colleagues, Paul Schlanger, Sky Miller, Hannah Snow is here, and our coastal lead is also here, Pablo Quiroga. And if I'm missing a few of you, I apologize, but it's good to see you out there, and you can help me answer questions later on. For whatever reason, my slides aren't advancing. Come on now. There we go. Okay. Here we are, the Stillaguamish River Delta. We've got the Skagit River Delta, just getting us oriented here. I think we all know where we're at. Stanwood, Camino Island, We're working with the Whidbey-Camano Land Trust in the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We'll talk about parcel ownership and land availability in the next slides. And this is a piece of Puget Sound Nearshore Estuary Restoration Project. Was previous work that we had actually done in, I think, 2012, I want to say, that identified this site as important for 8 species of salmonids and 90% of Washington migrating waterfowl. So here's the site and in its complexity. 294 acres of farmland, 5 landowners, the Nelson family, the Leckway family, the Sherman, Roberge, and Washdot, that little green box there, and then the Livingston Bay Community Association in blue. 2 are currently willing to sell, perhaps, for a total of 132 acres, being the pink, Roberge, and Leckway sites, most likely. Just giving you a bit of a view of the site. It's, you know, it's huge. These kind of aerial shots and maps never do these amazing sites justice. The top one is an oblique looking to the north. You got kind of the pump station, the main drainage outlet, on the left of that oblique, and then the drainage infrastructure and ditch network that goes through the coastal berm and up into the site. The community association there on the right. The coastal berm is packed with logs. And then on the bottom is a view looking generally to the southeast from the road, taken by John Small. I should say our team was beyond ESA, Anchor QEA, and Pacific Groundwater, now Mott McDonald. Peter Schwartzman also had large roles in this project. The background of just what's happening here on the site. The majority of the site is, you know, below sea level. In green is elevation 5, mean sea level is about 4 or 5. Mean higher water is 9, which would be the oranges and brick red. So a lot of the site is very low. The lands have subsided relative to mean high water, which would be a marsh, a natural marsh elevation. And you know, this form estuary, and we're looking for feasible alternatives to do some estuary restoration out here. What's included in the restoration analysis, both agriculture and residential land uses. As I mentioned, the majority of the site is ag, which is the community association in the bottom right there, being privately owned. The goals are to develop restoration scenarios, discuss feasibility, and make a feasible plan. Think about process-based restoration principles. So then any restoration we would do would support natural processes of estuary restoration, and then help inform land acquisition moving forward. So we came up with 3 general scenarios. I'll show you each of the 3 in much more detail in the next slides. Each scenario is meant to represent a range of alternatives, nothing set in stone in terms of channel locations or levee locations, but just meant to represent a range of restoration scenarios. First one being partial restoration on the left, figure the bottom left. Then partial restoration with a land swap that was proposed by the Nelson parcel. And then the last one, something along the lines of a more full estuary restoration with an outlet to the west. And you'll notice that the first 2 scenarios have outlets at the current pump location, so directly to the to the south. In order from least to most, 118 acres restored, 111 and 219. Cost estimates ranging from 14 on the left to 16.8 for full estuary restoration. The one in the center there is the most levee construction. The one with more full estuary restoration would require the least amount of levee construction at 3,000 linear feet, but surely the most excavation of pilot tide channels to make sure water moves in and out of the site to allow for natural vegetation recovery and some on-it access, of course. Okay, that's a lot. I'll keep kind of moving on here. Will somebody give me a 15-minute? I know I'm going to go for about 30 minutes. Somebody give me a 15-minute.
I'll keep you honest, Dan.
Thank you. So scenario one, as I mentioned, is the more modest of the restoration alternatives and requires some of the most levee construction. Tide channels are shown in dark blue. We've got 85 acres of intertidal habitat, 33 acres of intertidal 85 acres of intertidal habitat on the Lekwe parcel, 33 acres of intertidal habitat on the Roberge parcel to the right, and 5 acres of intertidal habitat on the Sherman parcel in the center. Key to this scenario is we realized pretty early in the design process that we couldn't connect the Roberge tide channels to the creek that's labeled there on the far east in sort of a teal blue. So all the tidal waters would need to go to the west and connect through the Sherman parcel. As I mentioned, scenario one is meant to represent kind of a range of alternatives. For example, the tidal connection through the Sherman parcel could be sort of north or south of where it's shown, but regardless, the levees, there would be levees, isolating levees on either side of that connection. Grade areas are meant to represent parcels that are protected from daily tidal flooding. This alternative requires new tide gates shown here in red, tide gates for the Sherman parcel and tide gates for the Lekwe parcel, and possible relocation of the current pump, which is at the currently located at the main tidal channel outlet. Large pump station there. It may or may not need to be relocated. I would think yes. Okay, scenario two, really just similar to scenario one. I won't spend much time on it. This was just a scenario that was proposed by the Lekwe parcel owners. Reason being is that the Lekwe 15-acre land swap shown in gray there, that's higher ground and perhaps better for agricultural uses. And then the top left piece that's labeled as Nelson 50-acre land swap, now in blue with tidal channels, it's a very low-lying piece of their parcel that could be better situated as a better fit for estuary restoration. Okay, moving on. Scenario three here, a version of full estuary restoration. The dark blue tide channels, that's not a final design, but those generally follow pathways of historical channels. Hannah Snow, my colleague, did a lot of work to look at kind of where the original tide channels were. Some of those you can even see still on the in light blue, kind of in the background. We also did quite a bit of work that showed that western connection to Port Susan, Livingston Bay, here closer in. It was probably the historical outlet, because the rest of the coastline was a coastal berm. So that connection to the west, and then possibly another connection there where the current pump system is. This would be 85 acres on Leckway, 33 acres on Roberge, 85 on Nelson, 13 on Sherman, and 3 more acres of intertidal habitat on the washed-out parcel. And the community association will be protected by a 2,370-foot levee, and there'd be an additional small piece of levee in the northeast corner. Okay, I'll move on. So a lot went into developing those scenarios and those concepts. We had various different analyses, ranging from existing conditions to modeled and proposed conditions. A piece of that, as I've mentioned here, was this drainage network that's already existing. The photo on the right shows the pump station that I've mentioned several times now. The pump station there is again at that southernmost outlet that I've shown on several of the alternatives. Extensive drainage network. This was mapped by Anchor. 15 ditches, couple of pump stations, depths ranging from 3 to 4 feet, widths of anywhere from 4 to 15 feet wide, and lengths, of hundreds to thousands of feet. An extensive network, all of which connects to that pump station, which moves water to Livingston Bay. Anchor also did an extensive vegetation community analysis. Shown here is just the various pieces, generally ag. I think I'll not spend a whole lot of time on this one, other than to say that the Roberge parcel on the far right has largely already reverted to a wetland mosaic. It's not currently being farmed. It's part of why it's included in the scenarios 1 and 2 restorations. The vegetation survey included a noxious weed survey. We've got class B and C noxious weeds in the ditches and the roadsides and some of the inactive fields. Most of these kinds of noxious weeds would be knocked out with post-restoration tidal exchange for the areas that do receive tidal exchange. Lauren of WDFW astutely pointed out that may bring other problems. You mentioned that they are seeing some Spartina in the region once tidal openings are created. But in the meantime, the recommendation is to maintenance until restoration occurs. Consider thick mulch or cover crops after any grading, should we do any restoration. Okay, some of the analysis that my team did, we verified tidal datums at the site. There's about 11 feet of tidal exchange, possible tidal range at the Livingston Bay site. We looked at the Tulare gauge and the Seattle gauge. We've got highest observed tides of 12 feet, navigating 8, whereas mean high water is 9. And we'll show you what that means here later on. We also installed a variety of gauges on the site, one at the pump house, and then a variety of gauges in the ditches to look at water levels throughout the site. We chose out sea level rise numbers to give us an idea of future coastal flooding um, from the Miller et al. 2019 study. The numbers that we chose, sort of immediate relevance, would be a medium risk of 1/2 foot of sea level rise by 2030 and a high risk of 1/2 foot by 2070. There are a lot of ways of conceptualizing and understanding the Miller et al. Sea level rise numbers. This is just one way of presenting them to you. And the NOAA 2022 study has numbers that are quite a bit higher than what we're showing from the Miller study. So yeah, 1/2 foot by 2030, I think, is a medium to high risk and maybe a conservative estimate if you look at other people's work. A short summary of the hydrogeologic evaluation, which was done by Peter Schwartzman's team of PGG and now Mott McDonald. They installed monitoring wells. We surveyed them in. We installed some piezometers and surveyed those in. The general findings were groundwater is definitely derived from the upland aquifers. You can see it coming down the hill. Salinity and low in groundwater monitoring wells, but it's higher in the ditches. And then we learned that restoration would increase groundwater levels, but not cause saline intrusion of the upland aquifers. So again, saline intrusion could present a risk to drinking water reserves in the upland aquifers, but we learned that that was not a risk, but certainly groundwater levels would increase if we were to do any of the various versions of estuary restoration. Okay, some of the work from Hannah Snow and Pablo Quiroga of the ESA team, the coastal assessment. We know that wind waves generally approach from the south and the southeast. The west side is more protected than the east side. We think that's part of the reason that the historical T-sheets and sort of the general topography of the site suggests that the original estuarine outlet, main estuarine outlet, would have been on that west side of Livingston Bay. We ran the Dell 3D SWAN model to look at waves for Livingston Bay. That's the image shown here on the bottom. It's ran for 40-mile-per-hour winds from the south on the left and from the southeast on the right. We learned that berm overtopping and water inflows could occur at a one-year event. I don't think it happens every year out there, but it certainly has the potential to happen every year where you have overtopping of the coastal berms. It doesn't necessarily mean that the entire site inundates. It just means that a certain amount of water from wave overtopping comes in. At some point, the pumps and the drainage network are certainly immediately pulling those levels down. The wave models suggest that waves will move sediment from west to east. We learned from the wave modeling and the analysis of the proposed tidal exchange, also called tidal prism, that both propose inlet locations in scenarios 1 and 2, the one where the pump is located in the center of Livingston Bay, and then the proposed inlet location on the west side, that when you compare the amount of tidal exchange to this wave power environment, that either of those locations would lead to the case of an always open inlet, so long as that inlet is designed, I'll say for now, correctly, designed according to hydraulic geometry parameters we look at later on. It should be noted that tidal prism will increase with sea level rise. Okay, a few just notes on coastal flooding. The berm is currently overtopping at close to the 1-year event. By 2030, the 1-year event will certainly overtop the berm. And by 2015, the berm will likely overtop multiple times per year. There's a small caveat to that statement that certainly there would be some adjustment upward of the berm with sea level rise, being that there are active and relatively stable feeder bluffs on either side of Livingston Bay, which allow for accretion in the center of the bay. So sediment to move and perhaps build that berm up in response to sea level rise. But conservatively, for this level of analysis, we assume the berm would not necessarily move up with sea levels. I think I'll leave that table alone for now and continue on. Okay, there are lots of ways of doing hydraulic geometry for tidal systems. We also hear it referred to as allometry models for tidal systems. We took sort of a first cut at this. We took the San Francisco Bay and Columbia River regressions. Those were scaled to Puget Sound previously by ESA. And some of the results are as follows here in Table 8. The primary outlet would be 100 feet wide, perhaps a depth of 13 feet below mean high water, and a first cut at side slopes of about 4:1. Primary and secondary, primary channels, ones that feed right into the outlet, 75 feet wide and perhaps 9 feet deep, and then secondary channels 45 feet wide and 7 feet deep. An important result of our analysis shows that, well, if you take 13 feet from mean high water of 9, that puts you 4 feet below NAV-D. I'm sorry, so minus 4 feet. The Livingston Bay itself is not minus 4 feet NAV-D until you're way out in Port Susan. So that's a head scratcher and leads you to an immediate analysis of a need for a mudflat pilot channel. So whether we would do a pilot channel actually 1,500 feet long, or look at some sort of cost optimization here between some of these numbers I'm showing, would be another round of design. But if you were to go to minus 4 feet, that would be a 1,500 foot long mudflat pilot channel. We strongly recommend some kind of a mudflat pilot channel. If it was half as long and not quite as deep, that still increases your regular tidal inundation. Otherwise, you're not getting nearly the exchange of tides on the site that you could. Another future step in this tidal channel sizing would be to use the work of Greg Hood. I should mention that we used sort of an average or a blending of Greg's methods and our methods to do the tide channels at Zisaba Phase 1 and several other estuary restorations. So some blending of Greg's methods and our methods would certainly apply to the Livingston site in a future design phase. Okay, a lot of the various analyses that you've seen so far fed directly into a cost benefit analysis. So the cost is just straight sort of civil engineering caps on here, and how much of these scenarios gonna cost to build. The benefit piece is quite a bit more complex. How do we analyze the site for habitat equivalency? Folks have heard of this HEA before, habitat equivalency analysis. We used a fairly familiar method, credits calculated as DSAs, discounted service acre years. So we calculated a DSA for each of the scenarios and compared that DSA to the cost of the scenario. This chart might be a bit of a head scratcher for folks. We use the full estuary restoration as sort of the base comparison. So that's why you see in the bottom right a benefit over cost ratio of 100%. What that's showing you is, let's look at here just cost per DSA in the third column. Basically, the cost per DSA falls rather dramatically as you move toward full estuary restoration. So a cost per DSA of 3,600 versus 2,280 for the full estuary restoration. I think I'll leave that alone. We can answer questions about that as we head to that part of the presentation. But the cost benefit certainly looks best for full estuary restoration. Okay, some of the basic conclusions of the analysis. There are many, and I encourage folks to look at our final report, which I'm working on today after I take a nap and heal up from my fever here, are as follows. Proposed inlet location is within the regime for always open inlets. An additional outlet to the west, the historical location is preferred because of some of the wave environment issues that I showed you earlier. Restoration may increase groundwater levels. It's not expected to cause saline intrusion of the upland aquifers. Restoration will increase intermediate high water levels. It may reduce flood risk from extreme events. The next round of design would need to, do a full analysis of inundation and flood effects of various restoration alternatives. We strongly recommend a mud flat pilot channel for all three alternatives. Not necessarily 1,500 feet long. Something a fraction of that may work out as well, but that's definitely worth further analysis to achieve, full tidal prism on the site, full access for salmonids as well. Alternatives 1 and alternatives 2 may pose a flood risk to adjacent parcels. Hence why ESA is ultimately recommending, full estuary restoration. We recommend a detailed evaluation of septic systems. Many of the drainage fields for the Livingston Bay Association might be below mean high water. So certainly the levee that protect the community association, at least from the, what I'll call the backside or the landward side, that may need to be accompanied by some kind of drainage and perhaps even pumping system to keep the groundwater levels low enough that these septic systems still function. Okay, that's what I have for you today. I have no idea how long that took me, but that's what I've got for you. And I've got my team here and a cup of tea to entertain any questions.
So you are right on time. We have plenty of time for questions, and we do have quite a few questions already in the chat. Dan, do you think you might be I think let's go ahead and keep your screen up because you may be swapping through slides as we move through some of these questions. So I'm just going to start at the top of our list of questions and move through them until we run out of time. Feel free to continue to include additional questions as we go, since we do have about 25 minutes before we need to end. So the first question, Dan, and it sounds like you might be using your project team to help field some of these, so I'll let you direct them as appropriate. Can you expand?
Who's still here for my project team? I think they're all still here. Okay,
Yeah.
so be ready, team. I might
Be ready, team.
I might just call on you.
So your first question is, can you expand on where the land swap would occur under scenario 2?
Oh, okay. Let's see, that was this situation. Okay, so looking at scenario 1, then scenario 2, I'll go back to it, scenario 1, and then scenario 2. This is an idea that that again, the Nelson parcel owners came up with. It's a 15-acre land swap. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but hopefully you could see just by toggling between the two alternatives. There's a lot of flooding that's currently occurring for them. It's not a great place to farm this very northern piece of the Nelson parcel, whereas the coastal berm is many feet higher, like 5 feet higher. So the idea would be Nelson would then own what's shown here in gray and give this piece to estuary restoration. I'll leave it at that. If there's a more detailed question, I might be able to answer that later.
Okay, sounds good. We'll move to the next question then. The next question is, what effect would the 3,150-foot levee or 2.37 feet along Sherman parcel have on the estuary restoration above its restoration, since it blocks the connection with Livingston Bay? Any chance this levee could be avoided?
Come on, Fever. Here you go. I think this is going to be the hard part for me, folks. My brain is not super on point, but I think the answer to that question is no, unfortunately not. There is a version, again, looking at scenarios 1 and 2, there is a version of these levees that we're showing that might be a bit different, but you've got to protect the Livingston Bay Association on, shown in gray on that south side. And, if the Sherman parcel is not willing to be an estuary and they want to farm that, then they need to be protected with a levee. I will say, this is a big issue throughout the Salish Sea, throughout Puget Sound. In certain circumstances, we've had very successful projects like Three Crabs estuary restoration, where the community knew that they were being flooded from the ocean side, and they were being flooded from the ocean side with considerable frequency. So exposure to the ocean from what I'll call the backside or the landward side, so long as it did not increase flood levels or increase frequency of flooding. In the case of the Three Crabs estuary restoration, we were able to completely avoid a levee as shown. So I appreciate that question, and I think it is definitely worth considering in a future, design phase. And once you get in front of these folks and learn a little more about their septic systems, a little bit more about how often and they live out there and how often flooding occurs. Certainly in the next decade, this is a place where logs are coming through their front doorsteps, unfortunately. So yeah, I agree with that question. That yes, there is a possibility that what I'll call backside levee doesn't need to be there because they're experiencing flooding from the coast side anyways. So detailed inundation modeling might show the community that the protection from the back might not be necessary, given that the ocean is coming from the front. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can you expand on why the stream cannot be connected to the project?
I can generally. It could be connected to the project. It could be connected such that the stream flows into the project. The issue of trying, it's above, so green is about 5, we walked it a bunch of times together, Hannah, but it's 5 to 10 feet above what's shown in blue. Yeah. So the stream is above. Go ahead, Hannah.
I was just going to say that the thaw leg of the creek is significantly higher than those kind of elevations in the Roberge parcel. So in terms of, we explored an option of trying to use the creek as an outlet for the restoration, but there's a lot of challenges there. But like you said, I think the creek could be rerouted into the restoration site if that might be something to look at.
Right, but tidal flows could not connect out and through the creek outlet. It's higher. There's a bunch of culverts, box culverts, and all sorts of things owned by the community association. So not a feasible estuary restoration connection, but sure, freshwater connection. So coming down the hill and into the site, that would work. Next one.
Okay. I think you started to touch on this, but I'll just circle back in case we didn't fully explain it. The full restoration in scenario 3 was only marginally more expensive than partial restoration in scenario 1 and 2. What is the cost savings attributed to?
I think the levee construction was a big expense. So the alternatives that require extensive levees end up costing a lot.
Okay.
And then one thing that was, not lost on me, Hannah, is that it still costs more. I think the reason it costs more is, well, there's a lot of dark blue. There's a lot of channel excavation. The site is, it's an ag site. So to do an estuary restoration means you have to do some kind of a very significant pilot tide channel network. Sky and I have learned the hard way that if you don't do these extensive channel networks, they don't form. And so I really hope folks, take that away with you today. You have to do. We've learned at a variety of sites. We can talk to you more about that offline, but you've got to do pilot channel excavation, and it costs money. That's what's driving probably the higher cost on scenario 3. But at least we're not building levees. So I can talk more about pilot channel excavation if there's a question on that.
Okay, that's good. We'll move to the next question. Why maintain the current pump outlet as a designed outlet if the supposed natural outlet was to be to the west? Wouldn't we be fighting nearshore process?
Well, if you can only do scenario 1 or 2, it's your only option. One of the big pieces here that Pablo and Hannah put together is, that was exactly my fear. So I appreciate the question. That was my fear, is that, hey, if we do an outlet, an estuary restoration like scenario 1 or scenario 2, that's right in the center of the bay, that's exposed to all the wave action. It's also sort of the convergence of drift cells and accretion process. would that even be a stable outlet? So the analysis that we did, which basically looks at a comparison of wave power versus available tidal prism. Available tidal prism means available volume of tidal exchange. It's essentially the area available for estuary restoration. So both scenario 1 and 2 have enough area proposed as estuary to give enough volume of exchange to give enough scour that can overpower whatever wave action comes at this thing. So yes, we recognize it's not necessarily the historical outlet, but a variety of analyses that we completed, and you can see in our coastal, you can see in the report how we did that, show that it at least would be a stable outlet if designed correctly. But yeah, in scenario 3, we're showing, you know, the historical outlet would be one of the primary outlets for the entire site.
So a related comment and question to follow that. So the other important part of number 3 is that there is significant freshwater that is intercepted on Nelson parcel and shunted south and would benefit tidal wetland restoration if it was connected to land to the east. Are you worried that more outlets would plug and therefore keep to 1 to 2 to provide enough velocity to keep them open?
I'm worried. Okay. You know, that ties, right, like you said, to the previous question.
Mm-hmm.
There is quite a bit of exposure, quite a bit of wave action coming into this site. If you look at, you know, don't let red scare you. I always kind of giggle when I see these things. Red is like waves of 3 feet, and you know, I live on the Oregon coast, so I'm kind of like, oh my, a 3-foot wave. But 3-foot waves in Puget Sound move sediment, certainly sands and even gravels. So that is to say that there is a certain amount of, there's a big coastal berm there. You know, the berm is clearly in the topography. I show that in this first graphic. Everything in brick red, that was natural process. You know, ag didn't build that over the last, that's not a levee, that's a natural coastal berm. So, you know, generally more outlets is not a good thing for the site. That's not what, you know, we would say at a variety of our other estuary restoration sites, but this one, given wave process and littoral sediment transport process, you're going to need to be pretty strategic about where you site and how you design those outlets, and more is not better in this case. Next question.
Okay. Does the tide information indicate storm surge and king tides?
Sorry, that was a bit too quick for me.
Okay. Does the tide information indicate storm surge and king tides?
Storm surge and king tides. Yes. Where is that? You want to just go for that one, Hannah?
Yeah, I think the king tide information, I think is included on that table. And we haven't like explicitly said what typical storm surge would be, but that's, you know, the highest observed kind of indicates what probably the upper level of that could be relative to the highest astronomical tide.
That's great. So what she's saying for us lay folks is that the highest astronomical tide, that means that's the sun and the moon and the various constituents of a tidal wave that we know about, of which there are 30, but generally the sun and the moon. Those are the astronomical tides anything bigger than highest astronomical tide occurred because of storm surge. So in this case, in Puget Sound, we see storm surges anywhere from a foot to 2 feet. And certainly you just take 12.1 minus 11, there's a 1.1 foot storm surge, you know, in this area, just off the cuff. So yes, we're aware of storm surge. It can be up to, you know, a foot or more on top of astronomical tides. And that would all feed into, you know, what is certainly coming should restoration design move further, would be a coastal inundation analysis that would take tides and storm surge into a more rigorous model analysis. Okay, next question.
Next question, is there a confining layer creating 2 aquifers?
Yes. I don't have the hydrogeologic cross-section to show you. So you groundwater nerds out there, there's a great groundwater report. Peter did a fantastic job. I think what I'll do is I'll say yes. Go check out the groundwater report. And leave it at that. So it definitely depends where in the column people are drinking from. There are confining layers down there, not right up top, but certainly down deep. Next question.
Okay, what about the silt input from the Stille?
That would be great. The Stille, like Puget Sound, if you were to do an estuary restoration, would allow the marsh surface to accrete. You know, some of the studies we've done with the Nature Conservancy, for example, on the Nature Conservancy Port Susan Bay site, have shown that because of sediment coming from the Stille, the marsh will accrete faster than sea level rise. That's great news for restoration on the Stille Delta. To a lesser extent, some of that sediment might make it this far. At that point, I would say it's more just Puget Sound, sort of fine ocean-derived marsh accretion. So the ability of this site to accrete, it would be a fraction of the rate that sites on the Stillaguamish Delta are able to accrete. And whether it could do so to make pace with sea level rise is an analysis that we haven't done yet. Next question.
Okay, so I think we have a lot of discussion that's also occurring in the chat, so we will save that just so that we can send that to Dan in case there's anything he wants to follow up on. I think we have time for one last question and then we'll move into our closing remarks. So Dan, this is your last one. Do you have barrier embayment reference sites identified to be used in the design of this site, as it is different geomorphology than Leke or Zisaba?
Someone else go. I missed that one completely.
Do you want me to reread it, or Hannah, you want to take that?
I was just gonna say, I think that's a really good common question. We don't have barrier embayment reference sites identified yet, but I think that's something that should be explored for the next site, for the next evaluation.
Okay. I think I'm going to fit one last question in, since that was a pretty quick response. Are there farm crops irrigated with a water right, or is it dependent on rainfall?
They're irrigated with a water right.
Irrigated with water.
That was a guess. But it's not dependent on rainfall. They are definitely irrigating.
Okay. All right. I think let's go ahead and move into just some last remarks before we do wrap, because I want to get us out on time. I am going to screen share just quickly some contact information for anyone who is interested. So here on the screen, you have my contact information if you'd like to get in touch with the project team with any questions, or if you have any questions about the Habitat Strategic Initiative and the work that we do. We also have a second contact here for our grant program, so you can reach out to them. If you'd like to learn more about the program, you can also visit the Puget Sound Estuary.wa.gov to learn more about the NEP program, as well as the work of the Habitat Strategic Initiative. You can Google that. We just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We wanted to thank Dan, who is presenting today despite COVID. And we did want to let people know, so we are recording this today. Eventually, we will have these up and ready. Give us a little bit of time to do that. We are definitely managing a lot of these webinars and making sure that we get these out to the public, but there is a little bit of a lag. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is, please keep an eye out for updates from us. We're entering into our new round of funding, and there's going to be a lot of exciting work happening under the HSIL banner. And so we look forward to continuing these types of conversations, promoting this restoration work, and engaging with our partners. Anything else from the project team that you would like to add before we wrap?
Just that was a fraction of kind of what we did on the project and what we're doing in the area. So, reach out. The elephant at ESASSOC.com, or you can find kind of any of us pretty easily. So yeah, reach out with more questions. We love questions. It's good to see so many familiar names here on the docket, and thanks for being here today.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll call that a wrap. I will stay on and make sure that I capture any last comments in the chat, but you are all free to go about your Friday. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.
See you, Jason.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, see you, Brett. I'll stick around.